So, again, I'm Brian Fuchs, and so current drought conditions, well, that could be done in, what, a couple sentences. It was wet in the fall and it's been dry since, right? The wind and temperatures have really impacted the region, everything from winter wheat to soil recharge and everything in between as far as the ag community goes. So what my talk is going to be here, and I'm going to go through this quick, so if you do have questions, we can get those at the end, is I incorporated the current drought conditions into some of the tools and ways to get these data from our online web pages. So we'll just dive right into it. We always are talking that the weather's always a concern. Some people talk about it in a way that's humorous. Other people, it affects and impacts their livelihood. And the work that we do at the Drought Mitigation Center is we really try to lessen that anxiety, that angst that people have through all sectors, not just the ag community, but all those decision makers. Try to lessen their impact to drought by different tools and information that we provide. And we can go back and look in the 30s, and this came out of USDA in August of 1934. They were trying to monitor crop conditions across the country based on how dry it was during the Dust Bowl. And you can see that, these comments, severely dry, crops very poor. And for anyone who had ancestors in this region, maybe were here themselves, we know that the mid-30s was a very difficult time through a lot of this region. Extended drought, a lot of hardship, a lot of crops just failed to grow for many years. But this was an attempt. Clear back in 1934, USDA is trying to give a big picture of what drought was looking like across the country. And so the question comes up, could we see conditions like we did in the 30s again? And I know many of you can go back to the drought that started in the fall of 2010, really hit home in 2011, even into 2012, and we saw pictures like these. These are from western Oklahoma and eastern Colorado, Dust Bowl-like conditions, and this was just a few years ago. So what I think, the way I like to kick this off is technology has come a long way from the 30s. A lot of what we're doing with our farming practices and grazing practices from the 30s are different, improved. Again, technology is helping. But in the end, Mother Nature still plays the cards, and we got to be prepared for what could come. So that brings us to the United States Drought Monitor. Again, I mentioned that I'm one of 11 authors, and this is a coordinated effort between NOAA and USDA and the National Drought Mitigation Center. All three units come together to provide the support and people and information to put together this weekly map. And I have the URL up there at droughtmonitor.unl.edu. We get about 12.5 million hits to this site every year. USDA is using it for several programs, several relief programs. IRS is using it for tax deferrals for livestock producers, and many others are using this map as a triggering mechanism for different types of programs or relief. And so the work is important, and we're trying to be as accurate as we can each week, putting this out for the public to consume. So on this, and I know it's hard to see, there are several different drop-down menus. There just isn't a map and that's it. What I have done is highlighted several different areas. There's a map archive, there's change maps showing changes over time. A lot of this I'm going to hit on as we go through here. For those that are technical, we have GIS type data. If you want to bring that information in, then we can do a lot with it. I think we are going to save these presentations and make them available, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time other than to say there is a lot of data and information available on that homepage besides just the map. The Drought Monitor started in 1999. The idea was we had several different drought indices at the time. The Palmer Drought Index was the one that had been used the longest, but what we were finding out is a single drought index wasn't adequate in all situations. So the idea behind the Drought Monitor was, let's bring in all that information. Let's bring in all the data and information that we have available to us and consolidate it into a single product, which is what the Drought Monitor started as and what we have evolved with it. Now, it is involving many different groups. Again, I mentioned the partners at USDA and NOAA, but also we have an email list server with about 450 what we call local experts. And these are folks around the country that participate in the making of the map each week, but they also tell us what's going on in their backyard. Sometimes the data alone doesn't tell the true story. And they'll tell us, you know, the data are really matching up right with what we're seeing on the ground, or vice versa. They'll say, you know, the data is saying this, but we're seeing conditions that are worse on the ground. You may want to look at intensifying the information. Or they may say the opposite. Sometimes they're telling us that, hey, the data may be saying it's a D2 drought, but we're really not seeing any problems right now, so maybe we don't need to go to that level yet. So those experts are really helpful. Again, several dozen inputs are being considered with the making of the map. So here's the most current map. You can see what's going on in the region. Again, I don't need to tell people down here how the level of dryness is. And so we have abnormally dry, which is the yellow, and then we have 4 different drought intensity levels, D1 to D4, with D4 being the worst. D4 correlates to about a 1 in 50 year type of drought event. D3 correlates to about a 1 in 25 year drought event. So when we start seeing these reds and dark oranges pop up in here, even though we've been through some drought recently, the data again is showing that it's just as dry as we have seen in some of those events, even most recently. We have the ability to pull up regional maps. This one is for the USDA Climate Hub region here in the Southern Plains, and it gives you the ability to not only look at where we're at, but also some of the neighboring states. We can also zoom into a particular state. So for showing Texas, for an example, we can go in and get just the Texas information. And so how did we get here? And when we start looking at some of these data, I know it's getting cut off here, but since the first of the year, again, we've only seen 5 to 25% of our normal precipitation through the months of January and February. And like many have said, we had a fairly wet end of summer, early part of fall, and then it just turned off. We really had that pattern change. And when we start looking at year-to-date SPI, which is the Standardized Precipitation Index, or one of the drought indices, you can see that we're getting into these -2s and 2.5s, even some of these 1.5s to -2. What that's telling us again is that intensity of that dryness is pretty significant. Once you get in that -1.5 to -2 range, those drought situations are fairly significant. Basically, that's taking your precipitation and comparing it to all similar periods for the entire record for these areas and saying that this is 1.5 to 2 times drier than what that normal value would be. So these change maps are also helpful. They give us the ability to look at how the drought has changed over time. And this one here is just over the last month. We can see that we've had about a 1 category degradation in this part of the country. But again, the significant rains that started in eastern Oklahoma and eastern Texas and went eastward over the last couple weeks, they've had 2 to 3 class improvements during that time frame with just the return of that precipitation. We do look at various time scales, anywhere from 1 week, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, all the way out to 24 weeks. So you can look at these long-term changes as well with these change maps. And again, we also have the ability to look at different regions. So if you have an area of interest that is an individual state or a climatic region or even a larger region or a river basin, even the Weather Service forecast areas, you have the ability to zoom in the Drought Monitor to those specific areas that you're interested in. And we also have this ability to compare 2 weeks. So I went back and compared the end of November of last year to the current situation, so November 28th to February 27th. And we can see that drought in the region of these 3 states has increased by about 28% of the total area of those regions during that time. And we go back to November, there was very little severe drought. There was hardly any extreme drought, just this little corner in far southeast Oklahoma. And we look at the area up here, a lot of, again, we had that wet end of summer and early fall, so really at the end of November, there really wasn't much concern as far as what drought would do, as far as how we saw drought develop in the wintertime. And again, that's something that we've seen changing over the last decade or so. We've had a lot of instances where the winters, the level of dryness, again, it is the drier time of year, down in the southern plains. But the level of dryness we've been seeing in some of the past winters has really eclipsed what we typically should be seeing. It's not just in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. It's across a lot of the southern U.S. And then we throw in La Nina that we have. So under a second year of La Nina influence, that signal of dryness over this part of the country really gets elevated, and that is exactly what we did see. So a couple more things on the Drought Monitor and the objectives that we're trying to do. We're showing current conditions at that point in time. We don't project it forward at all. It's not a forecast. It's not something that we're modeling forward. If I took a snapshot of the data at this point in time, this is what we are saying it looks like. Again, it's not a model. We're not putting all these data into a computer and it's spitting out a map. We're actually doing the map by hand every week. We start with the previous week's map. We look where that dryness has improved or where it's gotten worse, and we adjust the contours on the map based on that data. It's not interpreting just precipitation. A lot of the phone calls I get is, hey, we've had all this rain. How come we're not seeing changes on the map? And we look at, again, precipitation is a very important input, an indicator, but we're looking at a lot of other things. Like I said, several dozen different inputs are going into the making of the map. So maybe the top few inches of soil got moist from those rain events, but we look down deeper and there's still dryness, or the rivers and streams are still fairly low. Maybe water tables have some issues. And so we're looking across the entire spectrum of those different drought indicators. We do try to show short-term and long-term on the map, or a combination of both. That's what those S's and L's are. Typically for short-term timescales, we're saying that is 6 months or less. L designations or long-terms are anything greater than 6 months, and sometimes an area is impacted by both short and long-term at the same time, and that would be the SL. I talked about the local experts and how they are providing valuable input and helping with us to do the map. People from the Weather Service, people from the state climate offices, people from USDA, different NOAA offices, different universities here in Kansas. The state climate office up in Manhattan is contributing to the making of the map. And so we're hearing from a lot of people across not only individual states but entire regions and helping to do this. We try to be as objective as possible. I don't get a bonus if I show more drought or less drought or this much improvement or this much worsening. I got to be able to do a map that if any one of you in the room call me up and say, hey, explain to me why Southwest Kansas looks the way it does. I need to be able to show the data. I need to be able to show what I've been hearing from the local experts and how I made the conclusion of why the map looks that way. And science is going to push it. We don't do the map based on different programs or policy that's out there. We're completely independent of those decisions, and so we got to put a product out there that scientifically is valid and justifiable. And we do that by this convergence of evidence. What I found out in doing this work, and I've been doing it close to 15 years now, is the indicators very rarely line up nicely and say the same story. That you're going to have this scatter of indicators. Some are wetter, some are drier. And so that convergence of evidence, I try to relate it to a law trial, where both sides put out their evidence and the jury decides what happens. And that's kind of what I am. I'm the jury with the data. Everyone presents their data and information to me, and I try to figure out, again, what's the story that those data are telling me through that convergence of evidence. We look at these data all together. Through technology, we're able to bring all these data into our computer systems, and we can overlay them right on a map, see where the contours are and how to adjust them. We don't believe in one piece of data 100%, meaning that if there's an indicator that's showing conditions really good or really bad, we don't just put all our eggs into that one basket. Again, we look at all that information together. And the impacts on the ground, that's the ground truth of these data. And it is important to share this information with your local decision makers, your USDA folks, your state climate office. Basically, that's telling us, okay, we're putting moderate to severe drought in a region and the impacts on the ground are matching up with it. That's telling us, okay, the data that we're looking at is correct. It's actually depicting or accurately depicting what we're seeing on the ground. So I talked about these levels, and how we do this is we can take any indicator for whatever period of record is available and we put it into these percentiles. So we rank it from the driest to wettest, and the events that are falling into the driest 1 or 2 events, those are the D4 events. And the driest 3 to 5th events, 3 to 5th percentile events, those are your D3 extreme droughts. To be severe drought, you're talking top 10 driest for a region. So we're looking at a lot of D2 and D3 down in this part of the state right now. That's saying that this drought, the data are showing it as a top 10 or even top 5 drought event for this region. We do have some new maps for the Drought Monitor in Spanish, so if you do have stakeholders or decision makers that are multilingual or are using this information, we do have these available to share with those folks. And how is this all done? I'm going to briefly go through. This is the home agencies of the different Drought Monitor authors. We have 5 in Washington, D.C. at the Climate Prediction Center and the USDA offices, 3 at the NOAA Center in North Carolina. There's 2, now 3 people in Lincoln, and then we have 1 Western author out in Reno. Again, all the different data and information we look at. We look at the drought indices. We look at soil moisture, stream flow and reservoirs, remote sensing data. There's a lot of good information coming from satellites now. That expert local input and impact data, precipitation and snowfall, again, those are huge. A lot of it starts with how much rain has happened in an area and how much snows in the mountains that we can depend on that water coming in the different watersheds. Most of this information most of the information we look at falls into one of these categories, and realistically every week there's 40 to 50 different indicators that are being looked at. So again, the dryness in this region, I'm not going to get into the outlook because that'll be the next talk, but the dryness in this region really has set in hard. I know you're living through that. And any information about impacts and problems that are being associated with the drought in the region, that information is very helpful and it's utilized quite a bit by the authors. So there's our partners. I'll put up my contact information, my email and phone number, and got time for a couple questions.